Lula da Silva wins over Jair Bolsonaro in a stunning political comeback in Brazil, but the outgoing president is still to concede. At least 132 people are known to have died as a newly renovated suspension bridge collapses in Gujarat, in India.
Kyiv, Turkey and the UN have decided to unblock ships carrying grain from Ukraine, despite Moscow backing out of the Black Sea grain deal.
Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has won an unprecedented third term as president, making a remarkable political comeback in Brazil. He has narrowly defeated far-right incumbent Jair Bolsonaro in a deeply divisive, down-to-the-wire runoff election. Today we are telling the world that Brazil is back. That Brazil is too big to be relegated to the sad role of pariah of the world. It's a stunning return to power for Lula, whose 2018 corruption prison term, later overturned, prevented him from standing against the then far-right candidate, Jair Bolsonaro.
I want food for everyone, and I know that only Lula can do it. For trans people like me, this means a lot. It's an incredible victory. I think it's representing all black people, trans people, and LGBTQ+ people.
And there's deep disappointment for Bolsonaro supporters. However, their candidate had hinted in the run-up to the election that he could challenge the election results, should he lose, in a very similar fashion to former US President Donald Trump. From the highest echelons of power to hell in less than a decade.
The most popular politician on earth.
Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva transformed Brazil's external image at the beginning of the 21st century and was considered the most popular politician on the planet by the then US President Barack Obama. But in 2017 he was sentenced to prison in a corruption and money laundering case, and he was detained the following year. In total, Lula was in prison for 580 days. Back in 1989, the founder of the Workers' Party ran for the first direct presidential election after the dictatorship in Brazil, but he lost in the second round. He tried his luck again in 1994 and in 1998, without success. The doors to the Palácio do Planalto finally opened in 2002 to the former metal worker and union leader. The inauguration was greeted by many left-wing dignitaries who did not miss the ceremony. Lula's first mandate was marked by social advances, the increase in the minimum wage, and the first ever welfare program in Brazil's history. But in 2005, the first corruption scandal broke, known as the Mensalão, a scheme which diverted funds to buy votes in the Brazilian Congress. Even so, Lula was elected the following year, extending his term for a further 4 years in office. Lula's second mandate was heavily marked by external affairs, such as the integration into the G20, the formalization of the BRICS, the group which includes Russia, India and China, and the awarding and organization of two major international events, namely the 2014 World Cup and the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio. With popularity still high at the end of his second term in 2010, Lula participated in Dilma Rousseff's victorious campaign. But the conviction handed down to him removed Lula from the presidential race the following year. In 2021, the Supreme Court overturned the convictions and reinstated his political rights. The subsequent dismissal of the case that landed the former president in prison gave now the nearly 80-year-old politician extra motivation to face yet another run for the presidency.
Turkey, Ukraine and the United Nations have decided to unblock 16 ships carrying grain, despite Moscow backing out of the initial Black Sea grain deal on Saturday. The pact had previously allowed ships carrying more than 9 million tons of grain to leave Ukrainian ports unhindered despite the war. One of the ships that was blocked over the weekend was supposed to carry 40,000 tons of wheat to Ethiopia under a UN aid program. Russia announced it was suspending the UN-brokered agreement in response to a dramatic attack in the early hours of Saturday. by what it says was Ukrainian airborne and underwater drones on its naval base in Crimea. The deal from last July has allowed Ukraine to transport grain and oilseed commodities, while Russia was allowed to export food and fertilizer, helping to bring down food prices by 15% from the March peak after the war made the route treacherous. The United Nations, European Union, and U.S. have all urged Russia to reverse its decision amid fears of a global food crisis. NATO has accused President Vladimir Putin of weaponizing food.
It's a very risky and, in my view, unfortunate.
The International Energy Agency says Russia is going to be the first victim of Europe's energy crisis. Talking to Euronews, Fatih Birol says it will be difficult for Moscow to replace Europe as a client.
Russia will be a loser of this energy battle for the following reason. Just before the invasion, about 75% of the Russian total gas exports went to Europe, and 55% of the Russian oil exports went to Europe. And now Europe was by far the largest market, largest client for Russia. And Russia lost this client forever. And you cannot, that gas, quickly build the pipelines to send China or India. It will take, in the most optimistic case, 10 years to build these pipelines.
Birol also explains that Europe is already suffering from the crisis governments have been warning of and preparing for, adding it could get worse next year.
We will come to February, March without major problems because we were able to, thanks to the European government's policies, put a lot of natural gas in our storage. We will use that this winter. But the question is, next winter may be even harder than this winter because when we come to February, March next year, a big part of the gas we have in our storage we will use already, and how we will go from those low level of gas storage from February, March to the next winter. How are we going to again fill our gas storages? This is a big question because the conditions in the markets will not be easy.
Catch the whole interview on our program Global Conversation from Tuesday.
Survivors and the dead were rushed to local hospitals as rescue operation continued into the night, following the collapse of a footbridge over a river in the western Indian state of Gujarat. At least 132 people are now known to have died, most of them teenagers, women and older people. The authorities said more than 150 people were on the suspension bridge at the time of the collapse. One eyewitness said he had seen several children fall into the river and they were swept away. The bridge, he said, had collapsed in just a few seconds. The 230-meter-long bridge was built during the British rule in the 19th century. It had been closed for renovation for 6 months and was reopened to the public only last week. The state government has formed a special team to conduct an investigation into the disaster.
South Korea's president and his wife have visited a memorial shrine for the victims of a crowd crush that killed over 150 people over the Halloween weekend. The country has begun a week-long period of mourning while officials attempt to understand how the devastating crush took place. At least 154 people died as huge Halloween crowds surged into a narrow street in South Korea's capital, Seoul. Another 132 people were injured. Witnesses have been telling their stories.
There was panic coming towards us, some shouts of fear, but also confusion. We didn't know really what was happening to us or in that moment. We didn't have any knowledge, but there was a lot of panic and confusion.
My friend said to me there's something terrible going on outside. I asked why and he told me that someone had died. I said, what the hell do you mean? And I went outside to look and people were carrying out CPR.
More than a dozen embassies have confirmed victims from their countries, as at least 26 foreign nationals are among the dead. The crowd surge is the country's worst disaster in years.